I'm Richard Hara. I'm your host of Social Impact Live, a weekly conversation with members of the Columbia School of Social Work community. I'm pleased to welcome to the program today two guests, Matthea Marquart and Johanna Creswell Báez. Matthea is Assistant Dean of Online Education at Columbia School of Social Work, and Johanna Báez is Manager of Course Development and also an Adjunct Assistant Professor in the CSSW online program. So welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody in the audience that we do reserve the last 10 minutes for Q&A, but if you have a question, to please put them into the chat box sooner rather than later so we can integrate your questions into our conversation, which I think is going to be very interesting. It's focusing on trauma-informed online teaching during a global health crisis, something that is ongoing. So I'm sure there are people out there today who would love to hear not only what your experience has been, Matthea and Johanna, over the course of this last year in your respective roles as teachers and administrators, but where do we go in the future? How is this changing the nature of education in some basic way, I think, for all of us? So again, welcome to the program. And I guess we usually open the program with just a little bit of background story, I guess, from our guests. How did you get into social work in the first place? And I know both of you both got your degrees, master's degrees in social work from Columbia. So what brought you to Columbia, and how did you get to where you are now? So I know it's probably a long story, but maybe Matthea, you could get us started. Is that okay?
Great, thanks, Richard. So I came to the School of Social Work after my bachelor's. I had taught English abroad in South Korea and in Spain. And then I moved to New York City and I was working for a nonprofit that did environmental research. I was doing fundraising. And both of those were sort of different aspects of service to the community. And I wanted to go to the next level and thought, it's time for me to go back to school. And Columbia has such a wonderful reputation, and the social work degree is so broad and so flexible that I decided social work was for me. And originally I thought maybe I would be a therapist, but after that first year of coursework, when you have to choose which direction you're going to go in, I realized, having taken all the coursework, I was more interested in program level or macro level, institutional level work. So I ended up doing the advanced generalist practice program track.
Okay.
Over to Johanna.
Yeah, thanks. So I was a neuroscience major, and I always knew I liked helping other people, helping counsel people. And I was working in a residential treatment facility up in the woods of New Hampshire with the nonprofit Wadiko Children's Services. And all of my amazing mentors were social workers. So little by little moved over to social work and was at Columbia, a top program. Another colleague of mine at Wadiko was also going to Columbia. So we were so excited to start together. We had a lot of our classes together. So I did the clinical degree, and my research and practice since then has really focused on trauma-informed work, trauma-responsive practices. So I ended up starting a school-based nonprofit in New York City with the nonprofit Wadiko, and our main piece is being trauma responsive. And my current research right now is with youth who've crossed the border, immigrant youth, by themselves. And so again, trauma-informed practices, and then bringing each of those pieces really informs my teaching and my scholarship.
Yeah, I was noting in your bio that you got your PhD in social work from Smith College, correct? And that that was when you began the research into trauma, and particularly as far as it affects children. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
So my doctorate was at Smith College in clinical social work, and again, all focused on trauma responsive work. During that time, right when I was graduating, I met Matthea. It was at the first annual social work distance education conference, and she was presenting, and I said, "Wow, the Columbia has an online campus. You're starting it. Your ideas are so innovative. I just need to, be beside Matthea." And that same year, I went to the Council on Social Work Education. I was asked to teach the first online course for another university on trauma theory and practices. And they had a roundtable on trauma-informed teaching and learning. And it was just a light bulb that these practices in my clinical work are really applicable to teaching.
Well, I have a million questions for you about the subject of trauma. But before we get to that, I want to just go back to Matthea and ask a little bit about the online program. Because when I think of our online program, I think of you as sort of being there pretty much at the beginning. So how did that start? And how did you become involved with the online program at CSSW?
Well, after I finished my master's in social work, I went to work for a nonprofit that was focused on after school and summer school programming around the country. And we got a big grant to bring our training online. And so in 2008, that was my intro to online training and education. And I was actually a little bit reluctant because I really liked doing the training in person. But I soon got won over by all the potential there is with online education. And from there, I took a couple other career steps and ended up in 2014 working with our online campus. That was before we officially launched. So it was during the period where we were piloting our courses. And it was really special to be able to start from the beginning of the program and really focus on building an online program that's grounded in social work values.
And at what point did you create, because I know you have a training institute, right, for online teaching. How did that come together?
Yes, we right away started doing some training because our instructors came to us and said, "Hey, you're expecting us to teach online. How about some training?" And we said, "Great idea." And that quickly evolved into our 25-hour Institute on Pedagogy and Technology for online courses, which we've run 7 times now. So we've had over 300 people pass it. And it's really been something where we focus on social work values with teaching online and also high quality teaching online because it's Columbia, we've got a certain reputation that we want to uphold, and we want to have a cutting edge, innovative and inclusive and accessible online program.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I took the Summer Institute, thought it was fabulous, and am a proud graduate of the Training Institute. So, so here we are, and with the lockdown roughly a year ago, right, and the transition to online learning for and teaching for all of us. It was a cataclysmic kind of event, right? From your perspective, I mean, you obviously had some familiarity with online teaching before. What did you see as sort of the most immediate need? While everybody was trying to make this kind of transition overnight.
Well, we, just like everybody else, we were in a state of feeling very stressed. And being social workers, we wanted to contribute something. And what was in our wheelhouse is we know how to do online education. And having Johanna's expertise on the team as well, we knew that one thing that would be really important right now is teaching about trauma-informed online teaching and learning. So we quickly put together a webinar series a whole year ago, collaborating with our online campus administrators and other instructors with the online campus. And we focused on just the basics. How do you do it? And then trauma-informed teaching and learning was the second webinar we did in the series, then inclusive, and then hearing coming from experienced online educators. And trauma-informed, we put right up front in webinar number 2, once we covered the basics, because we felt like it's just so essential right now, and it seems like it will be essential going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Johanna, it looked like you were about to add something to that, so please feel free.
Yeah, and even in our materials, we were thinking about how to be trauma informed, holding just the beginning magnitude of the pandemic. And so we were trying to do quick bite size, easy to digest and put into action, kind of using a calm and warm tone in our materials. So we're trying to be really thoughtful even about the materials we're quickly putting out.
Okay, so let me ask the big question. I mean, what are we talking about when we're talking about trauma? Because it seems to me that, it's just such a wide and sort of all-encompassing term for, not only specific events that are occurring, but also people's subjective response, perception, how they're emotionally affected, and so on. So when we're talking about, I mean, what's a productive way to sort of define and think about trauma from your experience?
I have 3 buckets that I think about. So I think about past trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and many people are familiar with the ACE questionnaire and ACE survey. And then I switch to the pandemic, and I think about that there are key stressors, whether that be isolation, disruption of our daily routine. So kind of these key acute and then continuing and ongoing stressors. And then the third bucket is COVID-19 specific trauma, so that we are dealing with health issues right now. We're dealing with loved ones passing. We're dealing with discrimination, financial pressures. And I hold those 3 buckets when I think about the students in our classroom, and that many are bringing one or more of these previous traumas, stressors, current COVID-19 specific trauma. And then at the same time, we're all having that too, right? We aren't, we're a piece of this. And so as instructors, we're holding these 3 buckets.
Mm-hmm. And so you put together a training for instructors, and as I was looking at it the other day, I was intrigued to see that it starts out with a piece on self-care. How did that come about? And Matthea, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, we felt like self-care is just so essential right now. And for all the reasons that Johanna mentioned, we wanted to remind folks that it's okay to think about yourself in all of this, that, you have to, you can't pour from an empty cup kind of thing. You have to make sure that you've got something to give when you're teaching. And sometimes people, especially people who are in social work and believe in service, give and give and give. And we wanted to just remind folks that it's okay to also give to yourself and have self-compassion and self-grace.
Mm-hmm. And sort of prepare yourself for the very hard work that you're about to do. And there's a question already, and actually along the lines of what I was thinking. How does trauma affect a learner's ability to absorb and retain information, and what techniques address this? So more generally, I was thinking, so how does trauma affect learning, right? I mean, and what are some of the ways that we can both understand how that affects students, and how we can best help them to continue their learning?
Well, a few things that you might see in a classroom are difficulty focusing, missing class, maybe being very, very anxious about deadlines or assignments in ways that people were not anxious in the past before the pandemic, feeling very overwhelmed with emotions, withdrawing, not wanting to participate as much. All of that is, these are things that sometimes instructors can take personally, like, oh, the student doesn't like me, they don't like my class. But it really, if we externalize it and think about the context, it really has to do with the trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh, Johanna, thoughts about how trauma affects learning, and also across different ages, I think, as well. I mean, are there differences if you're talking about younger children, for example, versus adult learners that we have in the School of Social Work?
Yeah. So I was thinking a little bit about this addressing, right? And we are
Mm.
seeing this. I'm teaching right now, and both of us have taught at different periods during the pandemic. And we wanted people to have really quick and easy to use tips and techniques. So I don't if we could we have a link we can put. This is downloadable. It's free. And we created all these different, we built off of other people's principles and practices around trauma-informed care, but then we moved over to how can we actually apply this? And this sheet has all these different ideas of practices and techniques that you can use. So whether that's taking a quick break in the middle of your class, whether it's talking and that people are actually going through things right now and making that normative and real, and then conveying warmth. I was doing grading last night, and I'm really trying to recognize those moments of growth and be explicit and validate them. So even putting that into our grading.
Wonderful. Yeah, you've got this one-page handout that's accessible by anyone. I mean, you don't need a Columbia account or anything to get that. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
that was one of our main pieces when we were doing these webinars, is being, like Matthea said, being social workers, wanting to help other people, is we wanted this to be inclusive and be open access. So we put it all on a website, all of these handouts, and we were just trying to put it out as much as we could.
Wonderful. And we'll try to get all of the links and things like that posted on um, to this video and to the chat as we're able to. We've got a lot of questions, so I see if we can turn to them now. One question is, this topic inspired me to return to graduate school. I volunteer for CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate. It's been reported that many children are missing. They haven't attended school since the beginning of the pandemic. How will the education gap be addressed? Is there economic inequality around this issue? Why didn't social workers step in? So I think we're looking at some of the more systemic issues, right? How does that figure into our understanding of trauma-informed learning and teaching? Matthea, yeah.
It's a good question. And I will say that school-based social work isn't really my wheelhouse. I'm more in the higher ed, online education, social work education. But there is a lot of economic inequality. And I think that social workers are balancing, you don't want to send, because there have been cases of parents being sent to jail or students being sent to jail for not attending online classes. And we don't want to overcorrect. So we don't want to come down on parents who are doing the best they can and students who are doing the best they can, while at the same time supporting.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's a thoughtful response. Thank you. Yeah. Third question: what do you find are the benefits and/or drawbacks of the online aspect of trauma-informed learning, and what are the differences in how you address challenges? So, benefits and drawbacks. I mean, we haven't really raised that issue, but um, you know, has there been some concern about the trauma-informed model in general? I know, I think I've heard some people just um, voice the concern that it sort of makes it difficult to surface difficult content and so on. But I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. So, I mean, do you see any drawbacks to this sort of trauma-informed model?
I think one of the pieces with trauma-informed teaching and learning is that you also want to be really trauma responsive. So not just having these practices and principles, because sometimes when people hear trauma-informed, they just think it's about the theory, but really a key piece of it is to be responsive and respond and put these pieces into place. So my first class of each course, I'm talking about trauma-informed teaching and learning. And I've actually shown this handout and talk about how I'm going to weave it throughout all of the course and use it. Some people, they might say, is this being a little bit soft? And yet I think that, learners need compassion. Learners need a focus on growth and resiliency. And so I think that these practices, even after our global pandemic, are going to continue on, that these are just vital to helping people learn and integrate material.
Matthea, any additional thoughts?
To echo Johanna, I think implementing these practices within your classroom online can actually be very simple. So we're building in, for example, collaborating with students. So when you can create community agreements in collaboration with students, you can create classroom policies in collaboration with students. For example, do students need to be on webcam all the time? My answer to that is no. I would say that it's trauma informed and takes into consideration the way, different situations, especially during a pandemic. So I would say that a trauma informed thing is to not take points off if students are not on webcam, because you don't know if they're grieving. You don't know if they're worried about other people in the household stepping into the camera. You don't know what's going on with their situation. And we know that trauma can contribute to it being hard to focus. And there's also evidence now that watching yourself and watching a lot of people on webcam can make it hard to focus. So students end up taking away less learning from a class if they're forced to be on webcam.
Okay, so it seems that a trauma-informed framework, one of the major goals is to obviously avoid re-traumatization and to avoid punishing students for what is not an academic failing, but simply a normal response to various stressors and indeed trauma in their lives. So is it correct or fair to say that, with regard to what the actual trauma or stressors, I mean, that's not something that you actually deal with, right? As a part of online learning. I mean, it's not processing what's happened to people. That's still kind of external to the classroom.
Definitely. And one of our principles is to make sure to get them connected with resources. So, we aren't the therapist, but we're the instructor and they're the students. And so if I'm noticing someone's really struggling, I'm first of all, I'm encouraging them to reach out to me early. And then, if I get an email or if they stay after class, I'm, gently and compassionately saying, can I connect you with advising? Can I connect you with resources to support you? Can advising connect you with those resources? Mm-hmm. So we aren't doing that ourselves, but we're working to connect them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece there. And sort of the different hats that we wear, right, as sort of facilitators, right, of a class, and the relationship that we have to all of the students. Okay, I'm falling behind on the questions, so let me jump back to the chat. I am reading a book called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He discusses the collective trauma of Black men and women. In the book, he says, when our elders presented school to us, they did not present it as a place of high learning, but as a means of escape from death and penal warehousing. Schools did not reveal truths, they concealed them. What are some of the ways to break the generational collective trauma in the classroom? Yeah, the notion of a collective or historical trauma, right? And how that impacts the work that we're trying to do in the classroom. Thoughts about that?
Well, there have been some headlines recently saying that there are Black parents who don't want to send their children back to in-person school because online school, they can monitor the racism that students are experiencing, that their children are experiencing, and it sort of surfaces it, it makes it visible, and the parents can address it. So online education can be a little bit protective in that regard. But with regard to trauma-informed teaching specifically, we do want to take into account the context, so historical context, gender context, cultural contexts. And because we're being collaborative with students, we're creating spaces where we're not judging people, we're not making assumptions. Going back to the webcam, for example, if if you're an instructor and you see someone on webcam, you might have biases about what it looks like when they're learning. So if you just surface those biases, reflect on them, and then act accordingly, knowing that you might think that, this looks like someone's learning, or you might think that this looks like someone's learning, and you don't know if people learn differently and they look different when they learn. And that's, there's just biases that people carry and we have to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about the diversity of backgrounds that people bring to the classroom in their learning and so on. Johanna, your experience, I mean, has this come up as an issue in your classes recently, or at different points, and how have you responded?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely coming up. We're talking almost, every week of providing compassion for the range of diverse experiences. We're talking about racism, historical, current. We're talking about ways to take action around that. My course right now is on immigrants and families. It is a weekly conversation and holding the range of feelings, the complexity, the differences that each person brings, giving moment, a time for someone if they want to use their voice, a student to bring them up if they'd like to say something on it. Again, taking their lead and being thoughtful about the diverse experiences in our classroom.
That is absolutely, I think, the goal, I think, all the time in our work, but in the moment, right? I know from my own experience, sort of trying to keep all of this organized within a class, and it is, incredibly draining, I think, for certainly for students, but also for teachers. And a very practical question that came up here: you mentioned studies showing less focus when webcams are on. How do you mitigate this when encouraging collaboration with students? So again, how do we turn this around and sort of make it a more collaborative and sort of, power sharing kind of relationship, right?
I love that you're saying power sharing, because that's something that's so essential.
Yeah.
If the instructor sets themselves up as I know everything and I make all the rules, it's not very trauma informed, because we want to be collaborative with our students and we want to be trustworthy and transparent. So collaborating with students online, we actually have more ways to collaborate with students in an online virtual classroom than we do in a physical classroom. Because in a physical classroom, you can only have one person talking at a time, really, if in a whole group situation. Whereas with the chat, everybody could talk at the same time. And that is something that opens up participation a lot more. You can do polling, you can do breakout groups, you can do going out and collaborating on a live notepad or a Google Doc or something like that. There's so many options to collaborate with students, more than in a physical classroom. And that's one of the things I love about online education.
Thank you. Johanna, any last thoughts? Because I know we're running out of time here, so.
Just also the same thing that Matthea is saying, that we feel like we have even more tools at our disposal during an online classroom, that we can use our chat to up engagement, use the poll, and kind of seamlessly plan. We always have a plan that we go through to try to have engagement almost every 3 to 5 minutes.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, what I'm going to take away from today's talk is this sense of hope, in the creativity, right? Not just of the online medium, but of all of the instructors who are out there, really rethinking the nature of education itself. So, and in large part due to the work that our guests today have done in their training institutes. So again, thank you so much, Johanna Creswell Báez and Matthea Marquart for joining us today here at Social Impact Live.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Just a plug for next week, we've got a student panel, our Minority Fellowship recipients at the Columbia School of Social Work from the Council of Social Work Education. So until then, take care, be well. See you next time. Bye-bye now.